My name is Bob Miller. I'm the chair of Marine Conservation League Climate Action Working Group. And I want to welcome everybody on Zoom and in person to the MCL Climate Action Working Group meeting on building electrification. The mission of Marine Conservation League is to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural assets of marine in a changing environment. And MCL's Climate Action Group advocates for leading-edge policies and technologies that slow climate change that damages those natural assets here in Marin and everywhere else. Our policies and advocacy focuses on building and vehicle electrification, decarbonizing the grid, and removing carbon from the atmosphere. Other MCL committees deal with a really wide range of environmental issues, and those include adaptation to climate change. The MCL e-News contains a lineup of the committees that meet, the topics and speakers, lots and lots of interesting stuff. Now, we can't do our work without the support of our members. And so if you're not a member, you can become one by going to marineconservationleague.org. So here's the outline of the meeting. Brian Reyes from the county will present on the countywide building electrification plan. And we'll have Q&A, and then Brian may leave. He's not feeling well. And by the way, Brian is coming to us from New Zealand. Ken Strong will introduce Brian and ask a couple of introductory questions, and then we'll have more Q&A. Abby Young will discuss the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's new rules on nitrogen oxide, which should serve to end the installation of gas-fired water heaters in 2027 and gas-fired furnaces in 2029. Jim Burrows will introduce Abby, ask some initial questions, and we'll have Q&A. Then Ken Strong will discuss workarounds to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling against Berkeley's ban on new natural gas appliance installations. And finally, we'll have reports from organizations. So some very limited housekeeping for folks at home. Please keep yourself on mute. If you have questions in chat, and we'll collate and ask those questions. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Bob. Brian doesn't really need an introduction to COG members, as he's presented to us several times before, and he's the sustainability, not the director.
Planner.
I'm going to give you a promotion here, but
planner.
The sustainability planner who's really spearheaded the county's building electrification efforts for the last several years, and is been spearheading this recent effort to craft a roadmap for how we get to an electrified building infrastructure here in Marin. With that, Brian, who is on vacation, we'll let you get started and go for as long as you can. I understand you're you're a little under the weather today, but we'll hang in there. So let me know when you want me to share your slides, and we can get going.
Go ahead. You can start sharing the slides.
I can even share them, even better.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Ken mentioned, I'm a little under the weather, so as much as I'd like to discuss further after, my energy level may drop off precipitously after the initial Q&A. So today I'll present on Marin's transition to an all-electric future. It's a roadmap or a plan for our community. So here I'm going to summarize the results and findings. Some of you already saw this, have seen this. Some of you have not. Next slide. So our agenda, there's this Ninth Circuit thing floating out there. And I want to recognize that as it affects partly our work, but for purposes of this conversation, because it could go on, and I don't want it to suck up too much time. So I'm just going to bifurcate that. I think you all are discussing that later. I'm just going to focus on the plan and the roadmap. So just going to give you all a workshop series context, go over briefly the plan development timeline, get right into the workshop findings, have some Q&A, next steps, and asks. Next slide. So some of you have participated, which I really appreciated. Last year, we had 3 workshops made of community-based organizations, city and town staff, commissioners, no electeds, but and some building officials. So we had the workshops in August 2nd, September, and November, where we wrapped up. Next slide. Next slide, please. I don't know if it's a delay.
We're working on it.
Okay, sorry.
Not letting me advance this.
Maybe exit out of presenter view.
Let's we'll try to do that.
So
All
as
right.
Ken bringing that up, yeah, the workshop was well attended. We had community-based organizations from the environmental community CBOs, those serving disadvantaged communities or underserved, organizations serving those aging in place. Also, the building community was invited. There realtors, contractors, architects, developers. I will say that contractors, they're hard to come by because, well, they got to do the work, so it's hard to get them in, but we happened to get a couple. Local government staff, some climate commissioners. We had a PG&E sighting in the first meeting, and of course, MC was there every time. As I said, 3 workshops, and everyone spent about 7.5 to 10 hours total. Dedicating some time towards this community-based co-partnership in developing these actions. So in the end, 40 actions recommended for 2024 to 2031. I'll go over why that timeline later, but that's 40 actions. Next slide, please. So the plan development timeline, we started in earnest January, moving through March and October. We had some steering committee meetings with city and town staff. Then we started the stakeholder engagement from August to November. It says October there, but it's November. Drafting the feedback right now and the plan, gathering all that. And we're hoping to have the final draft by mid 3rd week of March. Next slide. Oops.
Something else happens here.
Okay.
Sorry about this, Brian. Every time anything pops up on my computer, it kicks me out of this.
Oh, yeah, bummer. It's okay.
Share it without going into presenter view. Just
Yeah, maybe just do that without presenter review. That's fine. So maybe just go to next slide, number 6. Just click it.
Yeah, I know. It's not, oh,
Yeah,
there we go.
just do
We'll
that.
just do this method. All right, got it.
Yeah. So here's the workshop findings. Next slide. In all, again, there was 40 actions, and so I really can't cover that all here. We're going to be here forever. So really, here it is at a glance, some key components to those actions. And I'm bucking them in 4 categories: code requirements, community engagement, electrification, and energy policies, programs, and incentives. And the first bucket, a lot of us are familiar with our all-electric and energy efficiency REACH codes, getting our systems electric ready, applying them to new construction and renovation. And the second bucket, we have community engagement. So the big takeaway I from the workshop was everything through an equity and access lens. That is the plan written more people-centered. And so, yeah, more people-centered so people can relate to it. Community-based organizations and building community needs to be engaged over time. That was a common refrain as well. And in that, also community engagement is workforce development, building the local contractor force, new or retraining. There's going to be a lot of, there's going to be enough need to be a lot of, I would say, some investment in that type of training. Third bucket rather, is our electrification and energy policies. Just separated that from code requirements. The example there what we talked a lot about was a time and listing policy, basically during a real estate transaction triggering some type of energy assessment. And then the EV acceleration plan, which Christina O'Rourke is pushing through. Other councils continue in following that acceleration plan. We already have that in place. And then there's management of refrigeration and appliance disposal. As we retire old appliances, creating a plan to deal with the disposal of heat pumps when they age out, because there's going to be some refrigerants that could leak from it. But also appliances, natural gas appliances. What are we going to do with that? How those be handled? Last bucket, programs and incentives. So I bolded the top three there because these were the most commonly discussed. A central hub for resources, whether they're low touch services, sort of virtual services, someone who's keen getting access to application and rebate incentive information and resources. And then there's eventually planning for how do I say, excuse me, the high touch services, that is concierge services. There's some examples across the Bay Area, particularly Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy, who've kind of recently led the way on that type of service. So it would be interesting to see if that would be feasible and would make sense for our community. Increase in mass marketing, I would say more like promotion. Government inherently is not good at this. So it's going to take a collective effort of non-traditional outlets to solicit and promote whether incentives or rebates or programs that people can access, working through our community-based organizations to circulate that information. Next is permit streamlining, that is making the permitting quicker. And this is important, so that the goal would be to incent electric over gas appliance installs. So whether that's combining permit fees or reducing permit fees, doing permit holidays or no fees, every jurisdiction is going to have to evaluate how they make up for a holiday sale in order to roll something out like that. Last two actions there that I'll highlight is neighborhood electrification. That is, instead of one-off each house, it's more efficient and cost efficient to do neighborhood scale electrification on the block level. That runs into its own challenges, and capital wise, that could be a lot up front as well. Financing and loan options beyond rebates and incentives is access for low, medium income homeowners or even landlords to access financing loan options when they do energy efficiency or electrification projects. Now, there's a lot already out there, so a lot of it is just connecting it to these people who are interested, but also evaluating whether it makes sense for Marin to do its own. Okay, next slide. So all those actions basically phased over a timeline is the approach we're doing. Phase in the immediate, near, and long term from 2024 to 2031. Next slide. The reason that was chosen because of the regulatory boundaries, and it just makes sense to work up to those boundaries, and these are inevitable timelines. In 2027, no NOx emitting appliances for heating hot water. And in 2029, space heating and cooling. On the state level, there's basically no NOx, is it NOx zero emissions by 2030. Cannot be basically appliances that are emitting NOx, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong later, Abby, that they would reduce, that they would no longer be able to install that in heating hot water and space heating and cooling. And then commercial, zooming back down to the commercial level or to the regional level, we have commercial heat pump water heaters are only allowed to be installed effectively. I know it's not NOx, but effectively from starting 2031. So those are sort of the regulatory boundaries in which to work up to. And we laid all our actions over. Next slide. So I'm almost done here. So next steps. Since mid-January, I've been drafting the roadmap. Today, a feedback session. February 16th, I released a survey. So that's going out. Just to let you all know, it got extended to March 5th. We wanted to put it in Spanish. So we are currently putting this, translating everything to Spanish and getting a survey that way as well. So we're extended all the way to March 5th, the survey. I believe some of MCL, you all maybe hopefully circulated amongst your membership. About March 8th, and it is approximately, we'll have the initial roadmap for document review for MCEP, all the cities and towns that are part of the Marine Climate and Energy Partnership. And then about March 25th, participants will be able to see the draft roadmap for review. The key actions that you have in the survey are just sort of the key components. The actual roadmap and the plan in its entirety will be released around March 25th. So all that wraparound information. Finally, about April 15th, we'll do a public draft roadmap release and comment period. That's to the larger public if they'd like. And then hopefully by April 26th, we'll publish the document and it'll be out there. Next slide and last slide. So to ask, if you haven't already, distribute and you all take the public survey. And I gave all our partners, particularly who participated in the workshops, media kits. So it should be relatively easy just to copy and paste. And as a question prompt for the discussion, think about what you all have already done or your city and towns, and maybe what do you think would be best that you can do, work on to support implementation of the roadmap. One thing I like to say is it's just not the cities and towns that should be responsible or accountable to implementing it. A lot of the actions, we do need help and support from the community and community-based organizations. It is a shared roadmap. So that wraps up my presentation, and I believe we'll move to Q&A.
Great, thanks so much, Brian, for that overview. A couple of questions to start off with. So as you mentioned, one of the important action plans is this development of a central hub. And I wanted to talk about that just a little bit. So the central hub would involve a website that is going to have all of the necessary information relating to rebates, where you can get various appliances, what some of these things are. What do you see as being in that central hub, first virtually, and then perhaps later as a brick and mortar? And then what can the NGO community do to help make that central hub more viable quickly?
Excuse me, hold on. So yeah, a lot what I see the central hub, and this is really based on the conversations during the workshop, is with the low touch services, as it were. It's sort of those who would be able to, who are keen on the virtual end, and it'd be a website, access to rebates and rebate and program application, energy planning. There's a lot of the tools that are out there right now that you can use, but it's so confusing. So in a way that leads to the user to effectively use it. Now, not everyone is keen on using the virtual resources. So with the high touch services, you get more into maybe there's a hotline, maybe there's technical assistance, whether they're homeowners or developers building multifamily. So fortunately, there is precedent of programs out there that we can sort of mimic if we decide to go in that direction. A lot of that concierge last part requires a lot of funding. I mean, it's a lot of funding that you're basically providing concierge services, which technical assist, you're basically getting access to likely engineers. And Mark Chabria, which you all are familiar with, can't do a one-man show of all the county. So that's the way we see envisioning it. The other envision what we see and is easy to model off of, not easy, but important to model off of, is Sean Yar's work with Ready, Set, Replace and San Anselmo and Fairfax. They're currently doing a push, sort of doing a concierge service, as it were, sort of light on that. So Carbon Free Homes is the company that took over, and they can likely implement at scale. We'll see. These companies come and go. So the evaluation of that by May, we'll see where that lands. And if that's something possibly we can scale, again, that would take funding. I think there was a question out there. Oh, Ready, Set, Replace.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, convenient. When you're thinking about the price point for the concierge side of this, when you're thinking about expensive, what's expensive? Because we've actually found that this can be, again, done in the right way, reasonably inexpensive, depending on how you're targeting, whether it's the engagement, the rebate process, or more of the technical, where you actually need to send someone into the home.
Right. I wouldn't be able to comment on that expense. I just know that in interviewing Peninsula Clean Energy, when they did their technical assist, I mean, actually, yeah, you're right. It's not terribly expensive,
Okay.
but in order to provide the service for free, we're gonna have to apply for grant money. And to that extent, if it is through the government, we'd have to go through an RFP process, right? And so that would make it more, how do you say, make it more challenging to implement rather quickly. That doesn't mean that we can do it cheaper, but if you have any suggestions on how to make it affordable, would be happy to hear.
I have a lot of suggestions. I don't know if this is the right time to have the deep conversation there, but happy to chat about that. I also had one other quick question. Hopefully this is the appropriate time, but it was in that section. It actually looks like it's connected to Leslie's question of sort of within the hub, what are you thinking about as far as the redundancy of other platforms? Like, both of our services, Ready, Set, Replace and Carbon Free Homes, the switches on,
Right.
Quit Carbon, but especially, EGIA just got a ton of funding from the state of California to put together Go Green financing with the idea that that's sort of the state level hub. Would this be, a pared down, more local version for Marin County itself?
It could be. And just know that when we do work, if this is rolled out through sort of a county government level, we can't really choose specific vendors. So the idea would be it would be designed in a way that here's kind of all your options. But you can probably design like, hey, you need energy planning, go to Switches On or Rewiring America. Do you need more hand holding in which a conversation and technical assist here, you can be directed to Quit Carbon or Carbon Free Homes if that's if that's available more wide. So it would be a smattering of and that adds to the confusion. And so the way we present it on the website is going to be important as the user navigates.
Got it. Thanks for the clarification.
Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I had a question, but looking at the chat, very interesting point. but or if that's something that you want to address or not. Can you see the comment in chat, Brian?
Yeah, well, sorry, you were cutting in and out there, and we'll echo which comment were you?
Leslie's comment?
Is it the one by Leslie or by Carlene? Okay, Leslie. Nope. I'm sorry, what's the question? I'm a little confused. Sorry.
Regionalize the help, as I understand it, regionalize the help center as opposed to,
Oh, right. I mean, ideally, you want to make this more regional, and I think really the opportune entity to roll this out regionally would be MCE, because they have scale across not just the Marin territory, but the other 3 territories they cover. And so I think that's where the opportunity lies. And they have a little bit less constraints when it comes, although, you know, they would have to go out to bid if they're going to give some technical services, but not going to speak for them. But I think that would be best to do it through them. But in the meanwhile, at least the low touch virtual, I think we can put something together for the through the county and MCEP.
and Brian, the other question I had is just a procedural question. The intent, I believe, is to present the roadmap to the board, the county board of supervisors for their consideration. If that's true, when do you think that might happen?
It'll probably happen during the fall.
Okay.
Maybe earlier, just depends on agenda where it would lie. But I'm hoping it would be earlier than that, but I'm just gonna anticipate fall. And the other objective is to you know, this roadmap is like a model. It's like the model reach code from the last year. It's sort of a model roadmap. There's things you can implement in whole and part. Things that certain jurisdictions can do just right now in terms, like, for example, a lot of them are interested in permit streamlining, as I discussed with city and towns. That would be something they're interested in, something that they can do right away in the immediate term to help accelerate this. So they could take that part of it and start implementing already. In terms of making a commitment, ideally, although it clearly would be up to the city and town, they would adopt a non-binding resolution to adopt the plan and roadmap as part of their, either align with their climate action plan or a standalone non-binding adoption.
Brian, one other thing that you mentioned in the plan was the something on a time of sale requirement for an energy audit. Can you just flesh that out a little bit? I know that that's still something that's got to be worked out with the realtor community and the like, but what are you envisioning?
Yeah, so for all of you who don't know, as I mentioned, the time of listing, this is not time of sell. We learned lessons from Berkeley. They said it's best to do it at a time of listing if you can. Energy audit, so that adds the intent is to add value for the buyer so that they know what they're getting into. It wouldn't be terribly expensive. In fact, there's rebates at the regional level to do the, for example, the home energy score, which would be an energy audit. So I think that's possible. Here's the thing is, we could say it's part of the roadmap, but it would have to be actual policy adopted at each of the 12 jurisdictions. So you have a challenge there in terms of if you're trying to unify everything. Doesn't preclude us from adopting and going out on our own to do that, but it would take a little effort. From what I understand, as I talked to Berkeley, who has the most mature program when it comes to this, it does take a lot of capacity and a full-time staff to implement that and enforce. It is a lot of effort. So that's something we'd have to each jurisdiction would have to consider. They almost would have to need someone dedicated to enforcing. So it just can't be passed and then there's no enforcement tool. So fortunately, Berkeley, or in the case of Berkeley, they've had an existing building ordinance for quite a while. So they were able to build in the time of listing policy within their existing sort of infrastructure where they already had a time of listing or time of sale requirement with other energy efficiency or water conservation upgrades. So that, time listening is great, and I think it's one trigger or one tool in the toolbox. I reckon there's so many other in terms of priority, and this is what I sense from the workshop participants. I think there's a lot of focus on this central hub thing and really mass promoting information and making it seamless with the community over more regulation, although there's going to be more policy and regulation, maybe a time of listing policy. But my sense is from the workshop is everyone's like, let's focus on that leading up to 2027, which is really a central hub, mass marketing, streamlining the permitting and getting those systems in order so people have an easy time making a transition.
Carlene, and we've got time for probably about 2 or 3 more minutes after Carlene's question, and then we're going to let Brian go.
I have a question.
Oh, and we have a question in the room here. So we'll, after Carlene, we'll do that. We'll take care of Karen's question.
Carolyn?
Karen?
Oh,
Carlene, why don't you go ahead first?
okay. All right. Thanks, Ken. Hi, Brian. So first of all, thanks for the nod to enforcement. We've been working a lot on that on the EV side. So that's really important. One of the things that, so we're considering getting into the building electrification space, in particular in residential. And we learned from 15 years of being in this that, education and outreach is just so essential. And I'm wondering, about, the nonprofit funding, and I think Bill and David may also be speaking with us, I'm not sure. But where that kind of fits into all of this, because we do need mass promotion, and I'm just wondering about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think those are the partnerships we need to develop. I mean, you've worked with the county, Carlene, on other initiatives, and then we need more of that. I think who is it? The last presentation I gave, and made a really good point at Novato. Sorry, one of the Novato commissioners, it was anyways, she was mentioning about getting an RFP with an organization that serves sort of the disadvantaged community areas. So they as in their so for example, there's Promoteros Network and some other networks, the community response team, which was developed over COVID through the HHS. They have inroads within the community. So, but that work takes, compensation of people to do that work, go on the ground and promote. So I think there's more opportunities to partner with community-based organizations, and particularly the CBOs serving underserved communities, helping them walk through the RFP process could be complicated. I think there's opportunity there to strengthen that relationship and provide, work to that community, as well as spreading the opportunity of electrification to them.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to talk also about
Okay.
market rate people as well, because from a carbon perspective, I think we need to address both market rate and disadvantage. So,
Yes.
okay,
Great.
thank you.
Okay, Karen, your question?
Yeah, hopefully
It'll pick you up. Don't
it'll
worry.
pick me up. Okay, so really quickly. Yeah, we have these timelines which are relatively soon, 27, 29. And I'm struck, particularly in Corte Madera, when I looked at the building permits, many people are just unaware. And I think it's going to be kind of a big shock, particularly with like water heaters, where it's typically oh my gosh, my water heater failed, I need to replace it right away. And then goes the gas. And we've seen, pretty much gas for gas replacement. Of course, there needs to be set up in your home. Do you have the right electric service? Do you have the space? Have you planned for this? I wonder if there's going to be any mass communication of letting homeowners know that this is coming, because I think a lot of people aren't aware. Now, of course, the flip side of this, maybe they'd all go and replace their gas appliances with gas now to avoid electrifying. But what is the communication, or has anybody seen any need for communication between now and then so people aren't in shock? Because I don't think most people know.
I think we're gonna hear a little more about that from Abby Young, because
Okay.
it's their requirement in 2027 that's the hammer. So, but
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
yes, I would agree that we do need a lot of that communication. So people are as least surprised as possible. I will say though, no matter how much we solicit and get it to people, the information, sometimes it just would be during the permanent project. I know that's not a satisfactory answer, but at time of when they have to pull that permit and they say, uh-oh, and that's kind of the education point, and just, experience rolling out different green building codes as much as we think we can get ahead of it.
last two questions from David and Bill, and then we'll move on to Abby Young.
David, I think you're muted.
All right, thank you. I started. Thank you, Ken. And then thank you, Brian, for being part of this today, especially being on the other side of the planet and ill. Thank you. And for all the great work you've done getting us to this point. My question really is about implementation, and there's kind of three little components to it. One is about Marin County's level of funding for you to press for implementation and adoption after. I mean, I know the focus right now is getting the roadmap completed and out, but those next steps of actually getting the jurisdictions to adopt and implementation. So there's that, and then the two other parts are. I think it proved particularly beneficial for Marin County to develop the model reach codes so that adopting jurisdictions or ones that we're considering had a model. They didn't have to craft it themselves. They might deviate, and most of them did deviate a little, but nonetheless, they had a model. Does the county have funding for that? And then the final thing is this was really kicked off by the Marin Civil Grand Jury report back in June of 22 to develop this plan. And I'm wondering if you're aware of any, I know the grand jury doesn't have any enforcement capability, but as part of the rollout and encouraging jurisdictions to adopt, who is it? Would it be the county that would remind the jurisdictions of the commitments they made in their responses to the grand jury report, to if the other jurisdictions engage in this, that they would as well? Like who's going to push that angle?
Right. So in terms of, I think there was three questions there. Funding to do adoption across other jurisdictions. Similar to the model reach code, I even to this day am supporting those jurisdictions who want to do reach codes. So that's just part of my work. With the plan, it's also part of my work. But when it gets to adopting it, but in terms of the actual implementation, that's going to be all up to them how they want to implement. Them as in the city and town. In terms of holding them jurisdictions accountable, I think that's your last question.
Like who is it that will be reminding the jurisdictions of the commitments they made in responses to the civil grand jury report?
Right. Well, I mean, the roadmap will remind partly me, but partly also you all. I'm gonna put that back on you all, is saying, look, if they adopted something, you've kind of adopted this similar to the climate action plan, and you can hold a city and town staff accountable to that if you like. So working with city and town staff to implement certain parts of the roadmap, or is not only from the county perspective, the county supporting, but also community-based organizations like yourselves to say, hey, this is what you said you would like to do. Where are you at this point in time?
All right, thanks.
Bill, last question for Brian.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to follow a little bit on the notion of getting the towns more involved in this. I hope you'll be going around to each of them and, with the plan and with the menu of actions that they can take, as well as MCEP. And I think the point
made a minute ago about how do we make the BACMed timeline more visible to the public here in Marin could be a point of an important ask or request that you might make of the towns and jurisdictions to say, to get them to do, not an ordinance, but perhaps a resolution that would say, hey, in light of these timelines coming up, 2027, 2029, and the overriding need to respond as quickly as possible to the climate crisis, in light of all that, we, the jurisdiction, encourage our residents to ... electrify their buildings, et cetera, and make use of all of these great resources that the plan makes available. So what I'm looking for is ways of getting the individual jurisdictions to put their fingerprints all over this plan and own it. And, we've seen from the first round with new construction that there was a reluctance on about half of the jurisdictions to pass anything. So is there an easy package that we can at least get their fingerprints on, and would encourage that? And I'll just wrap it there. Thanks.
Okay. And I think that was more of a comment than a question, but I right.
Well, the question would be, what do you think about adding that to your menu?
Yeah, we could consider to add that to the menu. I mean, inherently, I'm already going around each jurisdiction and city and town staff, like, here's what the key actions are, right? Just the core of everything is already there, not the entire roadmap, just those key actions. I've already gone around myself to each jurisdiction presenting those findings. So, asking the exact same question, which I had in my slide deck, is where do you see yourself implementing where you can? So
I think, Brian, we'll let you go at this point, because thank you so much again for presenting this. This is a great effort putting this roadmap together. The workshops were wonderful and a great process. So we're looking forward to it as it gets finalized. Brian, could you just maybe tell everybody as a last thing, if they want to find the survey and that they haven't already got access to it, where would they go look for it?
I can pop it in the chat box.
Great. That would be
before I head off here. But yeah, it's if you ever access the electrification roadmap landing page, it's there, but I'll just give you all a direct link.
great. Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone. Wish I could stay around longer.
What?
No, I said thank you, everyone. Wish I could stay around longer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Brian. We're now going to shift to hear what the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is doing. And Jim Burrows, could you do a real quick introduction of Abby, and then Abby, I'll tee up your slides whenever you want me to.
Thanks, Ken. So we've heard a lot about BACMed today, and we're fortunate to have Abby Young join us. Abby is the Climate Protection Manager for BACMed. Just as we know, BACMed is a state air regulatory agency which has jurisdiction throughout the Greater Bay Area. Last spring, BACMed adopted its building appliance rule, which is what we've been referring to today. The building appliance rule, which effectively requires water heaters to be electrified or new water heaters, I should say, new water heaters installed after January 1, 2027 to be electrified, and the same for furnaces, new furnaces that would be installed after January 1, 2029 need to be electrified. Now, Abby has been working in the field for 28 years, and we're lucky to have her as a local resident living locally in Mill Valley. Abby, without much more ado, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Jim. And Ken, you can fire up those slides. It's great as a Marin County, Mill Valley resident to be able to spend some time with this group again. I get to do it every couple of years, and I always look forward to it. I wanted to do a time check Ken or Jim, am I still good if I take about 15 minutes, or would you like me to be short? We're still okay? All right, great.
We're great.
Great. And I know that this is being recorded, and I assume folks will also have access to the slides. So I'm not going to necessarily, read everything on the slides. You'll definitely be able to see them. I want to more talk to you about the kind of big picture, right? So you've heard a lot of mention, maybe before this meeting, you've heard some things about the air district's building appliance rules. In this presentation, I'm going to talk a bit about the rules themselves, kind of our motivation, what the rules actually do, the impact we hope they will have, and then the work we are doing in this year since the rules have been passed, but before the compliance dates actually kick in, what we're doing to try to think through, how this transition is going to impact the Bay Area. So we can go on to the next slide. First, the motivation, right, behind these rules. Well, it's important to remember that the Air District, first and foremost, is a public health agency. So, the main thing that we're trying to do is identify different emissions categories and different emission, different pollutants, and how they impact public health, and how we within our authority can go about reducing them. So with these particular rules, we are going after NOx, nitrogen oxides, and NOx have different, negative impacts on public health, particularly to the cardiovascular and pulmonary systems. But NOx is sort of a twofer in terms of how bad it is, right? NOx itself has these negative impacts, but also once emitted, NOx react in the atmosphere, in the air with other gases, and produce what we call secondary particulate matter. So NOx is a precursor pollutant to fine particulate matter, and fine particulate matter is one of the worst types of pollutants that there is because of its ability to get deep, deep, deep within the bloodstream and really cause a lot of damage. So by targeting NOx, we're also addressing fine particulate matter. And so this has been something that the Air District's kind of had its eye on for a while. And how can we really have a public health impact through regulating NOx? So big picture, what we're trying to do with these rules is improve public health, improve equity throughout the Bay Area, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on in the presentation, and maximize greenhouse gas co-benefits from the rule. And I have to be very specific, and this gets to the third big bullet, working within the Air District's authority. We have clear authority to regulate Clean Air Act pollutants. We do not have clear authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a NOx, targets NOx, right, which is a regulated pollutant under the Clean Air Act. But we believe there will be some very important co-benefits in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And then also within our authority, air districts cannot regulate indoor air quality. We are focused on outdoor air quality. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about NOx, and we think about, okay, how can we as the Air District, if we want to go after NOx, because it also gets us these fine PM benefits, right, in reductions, where should we focus our regulatory efforts? So we look at the regional inventory that we do internally for NOx emissions, and what we see by this bar chart is that emissions from buildings, and that's the where you see baseline emissions from 9.4 and 9.6. Those are the emissions from space and water heating that this rule addresses. So that bar is even higher than all the NOx emissions that come from fuel refining. And for some reason, you are not seeing the label for that middle bar, which is all passenger vehicle travel in the Bay Area. So when we want to target NOx, the targeting space and water heating in residential and commercial buildings gets us even more reductions than if we were to target passenger vehicles or fuel refining. So that's why we're focusing where we are. Now, the pie chart shows us within buildings, where do the NOx emissions come from? And you can see the vast majority, or 2/3, are from space heating. The next big chunk is from water heating. And then that 6% is from cooking, and the 5% is from other, which is mostly natural gas fired clothes dryers and maybe a little bit of, fireplace inserts. So really, it's the space and water heating. And again, we're talking about those emissions that vent outdoors, because we're talking about outdoor air pollution. So from a regional standpoint, it's the space and water heating that are contributing to this NOx-related health problem. It's not the indoor air quality, where we read all these reports about how bad stoves are. That's a whole other issue, and that's not being addressed by these rules. Next slide, please. So what the rules actually say and what they are is on this slide. We already had rules on the books that address NOx from space and water heating. Regulation 9, Rule 4, and Regulation 9, Rule 6. What we did was we ratcheted those up, right? So about a year ago, our board adopted amendments to those pre-existing rules that did 4 things. And if we look at the table below, the first thing it did, and we don't really talk about this one that much, but it had a fairly immediate effect, went into effect last January 1st, of bringing down our NOx standard for space, or for furnaces anyway, to be aligned with the most stringent NOx regulations in California. So this ultra low NOx standard, it's not 0, but it's ultra low, has already gone into effect, and it matches regulations that already exist in the South Coast Air Basin and in the San Joaquin Air Basin. So at first, it's sort of a bridge, right? We wanted to at least do that, get that on the books, and get that in place. But then, and you heard a little bit of this from Brian, starting in 2027, water heaters less than 75,000 BTU per hour. That's your basic residential, single family or small multifamily water heater. By 2027, will have to be 0 NOx. And then in 2029, it's addresses furnaces. And then in 2031, the larger, more, larger multifamily commercial sized water heaters. And it's very important to note, this is a point of sale of the appliance, not of the home, point of sale of the appliance rule. We also call it a time of burnout. So we think that this does a lot more than rules or codes or policies that only address new construction, because these rules will address sale of any furnace or water heater, whether it's new construction, whether it's a replacement in an existing building. We also think that this will address some of the permit avoidance, because you can avoid all the permits you want, but when you go to purchase the appliance, you're only going to be able to purchase 0 NOx appliances after these compliance dates. Okay, next slide, please. So what we want to do is make sure that these rules have the public health impact that we want it to have. And so when we model, now we're talking about the PM 2.5, because this has honestly a bigger public health benefit than just the NOx emission reduction. So when we model PM 2.5 exposure, right, this is what you see in the Bay Area, and this is color coded by different ethnic populations. So you see the exposure of PM 2.5, and what this indicates is that the higher exposure levels are very much related to density, population density. And where we see greater population densities, we tend to see lower income communities. So there's a very good correlation between our addressing these emissions and addressing the health burden exposure and burden of lower income, multi-ethnic communities. Next slide, please. I'm advancing my own slides as we go. So what we find is that across the board in every single county of the Bay Area, the most impacted residents from the modeled impacts of these rules tend to be communities of color. Now, which communities of color vary a bit from county to county, but it is largely Hispanic and African American communities that are most impacted. And by impacted, I mean in a good way, right? By emission reduction. The Asian Pacific Islander is a little skewed because of the heavy population base in Santa Clara County. So when we talk about the equity benefits of these rules, this is what we're talking about. Next slide, please. So we've done some evaluation of the potential health benefits of reducing both the NOx and the secondary particulate matter from these rules. And there's ranges, right? In some cases, big ranges of what we estimate the benefits are going to be. And I'm not going to read these, but you can look through this. But there's definitely a benefit in terms of premature deaths, health valuation, we've looked at in terms of hospital admissions. Again, most of these benefits accrue to lower income communities of color. And then the overall reduction in these regulated air pollutants helps us reduce our peak air pollution levels, and that helps us meet state and federal air quality standards. Next slide, please. So I wanted to include the biggest common questions that we get about these rules, right? And again, I'm not necessarily going to read these, but these are what people are always wondering. First of all, how does this lawsuit against the city of Berkeley's rule affect our rule? And what Berkeley did was very, very different from what we're doing. The Air District was very careful to stay within our authority, both in terms of what emissions we're targeting. And again, as I've said before, really focusing on the Clean Air Act regulated emissions of NOx and particulate matter and not being a greenhouse gas rule. We're also technology neutral. So we don't say that you have to get rid of you can't buy a natural gas appliance. We just say that any appliance you do purchase has to emit zero NOx. Right now, that means electric. But if someone were to, by some stretch of the imagination, invent a natural gas, water heater that emitted zero NOx, then it would be okay. It would meet our rule. So by focusing on those emissions, focusing on emissions that emit outside the building, as opposed to indoor air quality, and focusing on being technology neutral really help protect our, what am I trying to say, potential for legal challenge. So far, we've not been legally challenged on this rule. Will this affect gas stoves? No, I think I mentioned before, we really don't have authority to regulate indoor air pollution. So that enables us to focus on the biggest, by far the biggest emitters outdoor are space and water heating and not stoves. Will property owners be required to replace their gas appliances? No, we're not going to come in the dark of night and steal your space and water heaters. This is when they burn out and when you have to purchase a new one, either for new construction or to replace something that's burnt out. Next slide, please. And I think I addressed the health benefits. They come from the outdoor venting, not the indoor. And does this affect propane fired equipment? We do get that question a lot. It does not. It does not. Propane is not a huge regional air quality issue. So this rule is just focusing on the natural gas fired equipment. Next slide, please. So that's background on the rule. Now, part of when our board adopted these rule amendments last year, they had a year long or plus conversation about these rules and talking about a lot. And we had a lot of study sessions with our board. We had led a stakeholder working group. I mean, we had done a lot of work, and staff knew and the board knew that these were going to be tough to implement. And there were a lot of unresolved questions about technology readiness, about market readiness, supply stream readiness, costs, equity. And so part of the board's charge to staff upon adopting these rule amendments was that we would convene a multi-year, multi-stakeholder working group to dig into these issues. And part of the actual rule says that staff has to come back to the board 2 years prior to each of those 3 compliance dates with a report on the readiness and the preparedness for those compliance dates. So for example, the end of this year in December, we need to provide a report to the board on how prepared we feel the Bay Area is to support and stay on track for that first compliance date, which addresses the water heating in 2027. So we've formed a multi-year, multi-stakeholder working group, and they're going to be they have been for the past year, looking at and talking about a lot of these issues. Next slide, please. There are about 40 people on this working group, so it's a bit of a monster, but there's a lot of different perspectives that need to be involved. And so, because we're talking about not just technical issues, but financial issues. We're talking about aligning with different state and local and utility issues. And then we're talking about a lot of community-based and equity issues. So we're trying, and workforce issues, right? So we're trying to include all these groups and all these perspectives in the working group. Next slide. So the structure, we have this 40-person working group. We call it the Implementation Working Group, or the IWG, and it meets quarterly. It has a self-selected steering committee that works with Air District staff to develop agendas and prioritize issues. And then the plenary group, the group of 40, has also self-selected into 2 subcommittees. One is the technical subcommittee that looks at things like, well, actually, I'm going to get into what they all look like. So for the sake of time, I'll just leave that for now, and an equity subcommittee. And again, I'll get into what they're both looking at in the next couple of slides. On the Air District staff side, this is being led by staff from the climate protection team, and we exist in the planning and climate protection division. So we have sort of a planning perspective to our work. We do a lot of work with local governments on climate action planning work and implementation work. And we're teamed up with the rules staff that developed the rules. So we've got the legacy knowledge and technical knowledge of the rules team, coupled with sort of the policy and planning perspective of the climate staff. We're helped with Kearns and West is our contracted facilitator to facilitate all this behemoth. And then we have 3 different contracts out to consultants to help with the technical research and some of the policy research and some of the research into equity issues like workforce. Next slide, please. Then the next few slides, I'm going to talk about what these different subcommittees are focusing on. And again, you'll have these slides, so I'm not going to necessarily go into the nuts and bolts, but basically at a high level, the technical subcommittee. And so who's on that? And anyone can participate in these meetings, but the main folks that are participating are utility, CCA, local government, state agency, But also we have some, community-based and equity groups participating, labor, market, manufacturers, housing developers, really good panoply of participation on the technical subcommittee. We were really surprised, honestly, that we got equity folks on the tech that wanted to serve on the technical subcommittee, and we got technical folks that wanted to serve on the equity subcommittee. So by allowing that self-selection, we've allowed really good cross-pollination, and the conversations and discussion and the guidance that these committees have been giving our contracted technical experts has been fantastic. So the technical subcommittee is looking at, grid capacity and reliability issues, microgridding, what are the interconnection issues when we do have to do these upgrades in homes? What are the impact of power outages? Next slide, please. And certainly costs, but part of that is understanding what are all the costs. And as we dig into this, we realize there are costs that we didn't know were costs. So a lot of this, work that we're having the contractors do has been really helpful to support some of these knowledge gaps. Definitely, technologies, supply stream gaps and challenges, market and workforce issues. And I think you'll see workforce show up in both technical and equity subcommittees. So that's emerging as a really big issue. And then I saw on one of Brian's slides, the streamlined permitting being an issue in the Marin County effort. Permitting is a big issue. We've been hearing from contractors and organized labor that in many instances, contractors really only work in one county because the permitting issues are so different from county to county that it makes working broadly or regionally very difficult. So there's a lot of policy and permitting ways we could potentially facilitate this transition. Next slide, please. So the equity subcommittee, again, workforce, right? The lack of an adequately trained workforce to be able to facilitate this transition according to those compliance dates is a very big thing that we are trying to explore. Another issue, I think we all know affordability is an issue, right? For sure. The housing impacts has emerged as a huge issue. This has a lot to do with the tension between building owners and renters. Oftentimes building owners will not even address the upgrades that might need to be made because they know that they have other code violations. There are health and safety code violations. There are other things going on. So, that's an issue. The landlord's interests versus the tenant's interests. Oftentimes with upgrades like this, landlords can use it as an excuse to displace people. So eviction risks, housing security is as big, if not bigger, an issue than even the cost issue we're finding in the rental market. So very, very big equity issues that we have to figure out and try to address. And I think with the next slide that's it. And I hope I didn't go way too long. It's a lot to cover, but I'm very interested in hearing the discussion and trying to answer questions. And if I can't answer them today, I'll certainly get back to folks.
Well, thanks, Abby. That was really fascinating stuff. That's an excellent presentation. Appreciate it very much. Going back to Brian's presentation, one of the things that he mentioned in an offhand manner, but in a one-sentence reference, was the fact that CARB, the California Air Resources Board, is undertaking rulemaking to address issues. Now, BACMID, of course, is a sub-agency of the California Air Resources Board, or at least it's a part of the California Air Resources Board, as at the South Coast Air District and other districts. What do you know of, or what can you tell us about what the CARB rulemaking is all about? But I mean, we're not asking for a presentation on the CARB rulemaking, but how does that?
Yeah, how does it jibe, right? Yeah, for sure. So And actually local air districts are completely independent of CARB. So kind of interesting. CARB, usually focuses on mobile sources and regulating mobile sources, and the local air district's lane is kind of the stationary sources, but the lines get blurred, as in this example. So CARB, we are communicating very much with CARB on this rulemaking. So we're very, when they came out of the gate with this, almost the first thing they did was meet with us to learn about our process and learn, particularly they were interested in our implementation working group and how we were bringing all these stakeholders together and what were the big issues that we were identifying. CARB's rulemaking is a bit different. It kicks in at 2030, which is, after our residential sized water heating and the space heating kick in. It's a year before our large commercial water heating kicks in. They have different authorities, and they are focusing outrightly on greenhouse gas emissions. Theirs is a zero emission, and they're calling it a zero emission rule, and they're still kind of determining what do they mean by that. But they, right out of the gate, had been really using this as part of their scoping plan to address carbon dioxide emissions and to reduce GHG emissions. They have been charged by state legislation with being the overseer of the state's climate plan. So they have a bit broader, they have more explicit authority to be able to regulate for greenhouse gases than local air districts do. So rather than taking a NOx or a particulate matter or whatever approach, they're calling this a zero emission, mostly greenhouse gas approach. Theirs is also, they're still working things out, but it looks like theirs will also be a time of burnout, time of sale of the appliance approach. And they are pulling together work groups, workshops, webinars, and they're really still figuring out the rulemaking. But that's at least an overview that I can give you on that.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And I'm sure this would not be the result, but it almost sounds like there's some possibility of not only overlap, but from the perspective of a residential homeowner, for example, is there a CARB rule that I have to follow now? Is there a rule that I have to? And is that going to make it more complicated or what? We can't know yet, I guess, until CARB finishes. But I see that.
I think that there were a lot of comments in the chat before I started talking. I haven't seen the chat since because I can't do, chew gum and walk at the same time. But there was a lot of chatting about, oh my gosh, another, how many web portals do I need to look at, right? There's one here, there's one here. It's confusing. So I know the air district's not going to set up another all-in-one portal. What we would like to do is see if, because we're a regional agency, perhaps we can link, right? Perhaps we can link all these great county-based resources and at least make sure that they've got those have all the information they need on the air district's rulemaking. And perhaps we can even be a bridge and bring in CARBs, the information that an individual might need to know about. So for example, they could go to the County of Marin's portal and find out not just what their own county is doing, but they would have all the information they need on the air district's rulemaking and all the information they need on the state's rulemaking all in one place. That would be, the way we'd like to see it.
Abby, I think I got an email the other day which suggested that I might be able to link in and observe one of the technical committee meetings. Is that possible?
Oh, so glad you asked that. So they are public. The quarterly plenary meetings of the working group are public. The committee meetings they're not public meetings in the sense that they are public meetings. Therefore, we notice them so many days in advance. Therefore, we make necessarily well, we might make translation available. Nobody's ever taken us up on it. But we reserve time at the very end of the meetings for people to be able to make comments. Leslie, you attend a lot of them. Maybe you could speak to, if it's appropriate time-wise, or put in the chat what your experience has been as a member of the public attending those. But yeah, so we have a sign up, as we, people just email me. It's so much easier. Email me and I'll connect you to get on that list, or maybe I'll find the sign up and put it in the chat.
Bob Miller has a question.
So Abby, I really want to thank you for your excellent presentation. It was very clear, and it also focused on, in an honest way, on the challenges that you face. And that's really important for us as advocates to know. You talked about the implementation group and the need for the need for coordination across counties in things like permitting. How active have the consumer choice aggregators like MCE and Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and others, how active have they been in the implementation group?
Yeah, we have several that are MCE is part of the implementation group. And there's one of the South Bay, is it Peninsula Clean Energy? I can't remember. There's another one that participates as well. And then in addition to that, we have a quarterly meeting with the CEOs of all the Bay Area CCAs with our chief executive officer and the key staff. So we meet on a quarterly basis, mostly focused on how the CCAs can engage with the implementation of this rule. It also bleeds over into other topics, but so we're pretty well engaged with the CCAs on this. And then we, at a staff level, we're constantly working with different CCA staff to get information and, on programs, but also technical information. So we're also trying to make sure that we're, being consistent in terms of some of the technical basis of the work that we're doing.
David?
All right, thanks, Ken. And Abby, thanks so much. Great presentation, and for all the great work you're doing and BACMED's doing in this area. So I'm sure you're well aware that a lot of the urgency that community groups like the ones I'm involved in to get local implementation of local ordinances in place is to help start implementing these kind of changes in advance of the 27 and 29 dates. I mean, there's already, I'm starting to see more and more of this where jurisdictions and others sort of shrug and say, oh, well, it's just a few years till BACMED's rule changes come into play. So we don't really have to do anything locally. And I'm saying, no, we got to keep pushing because of the risk that for whatever reason, those rules might, be delayed. Their implementation might be delayed or disrupted, in some kind of challenge, legal challenge, stuff like that. Can you speak at all to sort of the level of confidence that you have, that BACMED has, that those dates will stand firm?
I am so not allowed to do that. But
well, I just thought maybe you had your crystal ball there and you could.
I know. Oh, we have to be so careful with these rules. We were not even. We decided so. Well, we didn't go. The COP every year, international climate. We did not go this last year because of where it was being held and how basically awful. I think our board even adopted a resolution condemning the COP, but in previous years, we have always gone, and we specifically never spoke about this rule there. And I'm going to the California Climate Policy Summit in a couple weeks in Sacramento, and it would be a great place to talk about these rules, but not going to talk about these rules there because it's a climate event. And if that could show up in a lawsuit. You spoke about this at a climate event, therefore it's a climate rule. So we have to be really careful. But in terms, so we haven't been sued yet. Okay, it's been almost a year. We think we're on really strong ground. The Air District does not want to delay these compliance dates. We don't I mean, I'm going to say this, but I mean it softer than it sounds. We don't have the intention. Our intention is to move forward with these compliance dates, but we have to be truthful about the issues. So I think we're doing a really good job of trying to identify all the issues and trying to explore them. And we're going to be, and there are going to be some issues that, some are going to be more important and more directly impactful to the compliance date rollout than others, but we want to make sure all the issues are known. And, but there are going to be folks that, regardless of, what our research and our, stakeholder work unveils, they're going to want us to delay the compliance dates. So I would say just, for all of you, being, advocates of sticking to the compliance dates is helpful.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, Abby, on the issue of enforcement, so the 2027 rolls around, 2029 rolls around, new water/space heaters need to be electric. How does it know that that's happening?
Yeah, so this will be enforced at two places. Primarily at the manufacturer/distributor level. And so let's say Home Depot, right? Home Depot, and it's built into the rule, there's a certification process, and they have to go through a process to determine that any appliance that they are selling does not emit NOx. And it's built into the rule. There's formula, equation, a process, and they have to report to the Air District. Yes, it's self-reporting, but it is a process that they must go through. Now, and in addition, the Air District's Compliance and Enforcement Division will be enforcing at the distributor level. Now, is it going to be, every month Home Depot gets an inspector out there? Probably not. We just don't have that much staff, but that has been built into the rule. The other enforcement point is at the permit level, the local permit level. So there will be some ability for local agencies to add this to their building inspection, add this to their permitting list. That adds a burden to local permitting offices for sure. And honestly, at that point, it's out of the Air District's hands. So how that might get followed up on at the local level, I have every sympathy in the world with local building offices and the stresses on their inspection staff. So I'm hoping that the more upstream, compliance triggers will be effective.
Okay.
Right. Well, Abby, that's quite a process you guys are involved in, and it's very encouraging as to how thorough it is. And the enforcement mechanisms sound great. So I guess if you're a contractor who's going to want to install a gas water heater, you're gonna have to drive out of the 9 area counties to go find some place where you can buy one.
And then hope that your local building office isn't going to flag it. So it's not going to be easy, right, to do that.
No. Any other questions for Abby? Okay. Well, again, thanks so much. So with that, we're going to shift, I guess, to the next part of the program. You're welcome to stay, Abby, if you want. But Jim Burrows and I are going to now talk about the Ninth Circuit ruling just a little bit and what seemed to be the viable paths to follow at this point. And I know how to do it. Okay, there we go. So Jim's going to first talk about, what, just kind of bring everybody back up to speed on the Ninth Circuit ruling and what it involves and what it doesn't. And then I'm going to talk about what seem to be some viable pathways. I just wanted to highlight that this slideshow and much of the content of it has been shamelessly stolen from a presentation that the Public Health Law Center, RMI, and IMT put on. There's a link here on this page to their webinar. So if you want more information on it, I thought it was very good on what the options were going forward. So with that, Jim, why don't you give us a little something on the Ninth Circuit ruling and what it involves, and if you want me to forward through these slides, let me know.
Sure. Okay, Ken, well, the Berkeley decision that we're all talking about is all turns on the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, EPCA. EPCA was passed in the 1970s by Congress to stimulate energy production and energy efficiency, and it creates mandatory appliance efficiency standards that are applicable nationwide. Now, with exceptions, EPCA preempts state and local laws concerning energy efficiency or energy use of covered appliances. Covered appliances like furnaces, water heaters, washer dryers, cooking products, etc. And just as a general statement, preemption generally means that a state or local law is found to have no legal effect if there is a federal law like EPCA that governs the same thing. And that's what was found in Berkeley. So next slide. So in the Berkeley decision, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in its 2024 decision regarding the city of Berkeley's ordinance stems from an ordinance that the city enacted in July 2019 that banned gas piping in new building construction, thereby effectively requiring appliances like furnaces, water heaters, and stovetops to be electric, not gas-fired. But when the Ninth Circuit looked at Berkeley's ordinance, it found it to be preempted by EPCA and therefore unenforceable because, as the court found, Berkeley tried to do indirectly, that is to say, to cut off the natural gas supply to gas-fired appliances in new construction, that which Berkeley clearly cannot do directly, which is to impose an outright ban on gas-fired appliances. So what Berkeley can't do directly, the court said, we're not going to allow you to do it indirectly either. Now, even the court did find that the Berkeley ordinance to be preempted, the court makes clear that there are limits to the scope of the EPCA preemption. Next slide. So again, in review, under the Ninth Circuit, building code-based appliance bans for new construction are preempted. And direct appliance bans that would otherwise be imposed by a local agency are preempted. But there may be workarounds available to cities and counties, something that Ken is going to get into. But it helps to understand that the scope of the court's decision is limited to the structure side of the gas meter. The delivery of gas to the meter, which is the green side of this diagram here, is not directly addressed by the court. So the next slide, Ken. The decision that we're talking about here is limited to the jurisdiction of the Ninth Circuit only, currently limited to the jurisdiction of the Ninth Circuit only, which are the states colored in the yellow on this map. There is a possibility, I didn't check this morning, but there is the possibility of an appeal of the Ninth Circuit Court decision to the Supreme Court. But such appeal would have to be filed, as I understand it, by April 1, or at least that's what I've been told anyway. I'm not sure how many people are holding their breath that the city of Berkeley is going to appeal this decision to the Supreme Court, but there is that possibility. Also, it's possible that some of the other circuits, the 10th Circuit, the 8th Circuit, the 7th Circuit, and so on, might interpret EPCA and the EPCA scope of the EPCA preemption differently than did the 9th Circuit, in which case the Supreme Court might be motivated to take up the case to resolve any differences between the circuits. And finally, there's also always the possibility of federal clarifying legislation if that were ever to be enacted. None of these options seem particularly obvious or likely to me, but what we know is that for now and for the currently foreseeable future, in at least the 10-state jurisdiction of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, local bans on gas-fired appliances are not legally viable. So what are the workarounds? And that's where, Ken, you're going to take it away from here.
Okay, so there seem to be 4 ways of working around the Ninth Circuit decision. The first is NOx restrictions, which we've heard a lot about from Abby this morning. The second are what are called flexible energy codes that comply with the EPCA requirements for which has a specific exception for building codes that meet certain criteria. There are electric readiness requirements are perfectly permissible and certainly can incentivize electric appliances be installed in place of gas. And then there's something called building performance standards, which I'll go more into. So I don't think we need to go into much these NOx-based requirements. I will say that there is one local jurisdiction which is in the process of passing a NOx requirement, and the city of Los Altos, which had a building code provision similar to Berkeley's in the sense that it was a ban on new gas hookups. They've now added a requirement that any appliances have to be 0 NOx. I'm pretty skeptical about whether that's going to withstand scrutiny. They haven't, at least at the staff report that I saw from Los Altos, did not attempt to incorporate any of the extensive work that the Bachman had done in terms of health-based consequences, et cetera. And the city of Los Altos also does not have the sort of jurisdiction over criteria pollutants that the air district has. But so we'll see what happens with that one. There then are things like flexible energy codes, and some examples of them. The Marin County REACH codes that went into effect a year ago for major remodels has a flexible energy code in it. And just speaking briefly, what that does is it provides that a building owner has a number of choices which are all deemed to be cost effective as a way of meeting increased energy efficiency standards, at least one of which may well involve replacing your gas appliances with electric. The way I have often described them is you can require a new building owner to insulate their entire house, replace all their their windows with double panes, or they can put in a new electric water heater, heat pump water heater. That's a little bit of an extreme example, but that's the way flexible energy codes work. Washington State amended its code after the Ninth Circuit decision came down. It's the first time in order to take this approach. And Colorado has a model electric ready and solar ready code, which is sort of part of this flexible reach code idea. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are the 7 requirements that are specifically written in EPCA, where which explain how a code can get around the EPCA preemption. Again, basically, gives the builders options, and they can put together some various things which can work around, which don't have the effect of just outright banning a particular covered appliance. The other approach is building performance standards. And these are ones where over time, looking to the future, you set energy use or emissions caps for whole buildings. They're not believed to be preempted by EPCA because it applies at the building level and not to individual appliances. It applies to existing buildings in most cases, doesn't specifically address new construction in terms of a building performance standard. And it does not completely eliminate any particular appliance use, at least not till well down the road. Building performance standards have been adopted by a number of jurisdictions: New York City, Boston, St. Louis, District of Columbia, 4 states, and so far 1 city in California, Chula Vista. And in that case, in the Chula Vista case, so they have a performance requirement which steps down the amount of energy use per square foot in a building over 20 years. And they also have anti-displacement and affordable housing protections in it. And the way these are designed, and this IMT model of building performance law that I referenced in the bottom of the slide, they're a really good source if you want more information on these things. But the way they describe it is, so a building owner that currently is a higher emitter has to come down at a faster rate than a lower emitter building, but all buildings of the same class need to arrive at the end point at the 20-year thing. And it may be that a building owner can take different paths. They may first of all decide that they're just going to change out all their light fixtures and insulate their building. And then they're going to do electric readiness at some other time in the future, and they're not going to actually change out their appliances until burnout or 15 or 20 years down the road. But this is another way to get around it. And something else is happening in California is SB 48, which passed last year, requires the California Energy Commission to use energy usage data to develop by 2026 a strategy to decarbonize large existing buildings. Doesn't explicitly require BPS, but CEC has already called for an approach that incorporates building performance and the like. So this hopefully will be enacted at a state level sometime after 2026. The literature suggests that if California does enact a statewide building performance standard, it probably will not preempt stronger local building performance standards. So those are just some ideas. Some other things that state and local governments can do is there's nothing, the Ninth Circuit decision made it clear that it doesn't affect decisions that are made on where gas is supplied. So there's no reason that a local jurisdiction could not limit where new gas lines in the street go. Neighborhood electrification being an example of that. Currently, there's a state law which is called the obligation to serve, which requires that utilities provide gas and electricity to any customer that wants them. We may need a change in that law so that the obligation to serve is a choice. The utility can serve you with either electricity or gas. They would almost undoubtedly choose electricity. But right now they have to provide gas to anybody that asks for it. Some other policies that are referenced in the Ninth Circuit decision is it suggested that there's nothing that would prevent a local municipality from imposing an emission tax or a higher fee on gas appliances. And of course, other things like electric ready and energy audit requirements are other ways of encouraging people to go electric. So I'll stop sharing at this point.
Further questions?
Yeah, any questions on this? Leslie, I will try and do that.
David?
Thanks. And Ken, thanks. And Jim, thanks for that excellent presentation. A couple of questions. One, on the building performance standards, you weren't real explicit on this one way or the other, but as I understand it, were applied to date. It's primarily on commercial buildings, not on residential scale buildings. Is that correct?
It's mostly been on large buildings. Yes. Commercial scale, I think would be the way to say it. Yeah.
So that may not be, I mean, is your sense that that would be an applicable approach for residential? I mean, it would, like with a commercial building, there's other permitting requirements that, you know, a non-complying building owner could be forced to do this or that. I'm not sure that that applies for residential. What's your sense on that?
The folks at INT do not seem to have focused on single family residential. And I assume that's what you're talking about.
Yes,
They
yes, thank you.
they would apply to large multifamily buildings, which is why they're very careful to make sure they've got anti-displacement provisions in their model codes and the like.
And Ken and Jim, one other thing I'm curious about, since you guys have really dug into this quite a bit, you know, when the Ninth Circuit decision first came out, and especially when the en banc request was denied, I think there's been a sense that somebody was going to come up with a model ordinance that jurisdictions that have already adopted an all electric for new ordinance or were contemplating it could substitute for what they had. My sense is we're not quite there yet. And there's a whole menu of approaches that are being used here, different situations, different approaches and so on. Is your sense that there's going to be some sort of model ordinance that local jurisdictions could adopt that's going to inoculate them against a challenge under the Ninth Circuit decision?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sure I'm sure there's a lot of folks that are actively looking at revising their city ordinances to try and make them bulletproof. And I'm sure RMI and Building Decarb Coalition are looking at what might end up being a model, but that's my sense.
Not quite there yet, though.
Ken, do you have any comments?
No. I mean, other than the obvious, which is that when it gets to counties and cities trying to adopt the model ordinance, they have to make a very practical decision as to who wants to be first out of the gate, who's going to be subject to the next lawsuit. Now, Ken referenced the city of Los Altos and what it's done with regard to its NOx emission ordinance that it has under consideration, and so they seem to be ready to go forth. But it's always a very practical consideration, of course, for local agencies to know where they're going to put their resources in terms of, you know, potentially risking a challenge.
There is one other thing that I forgot to say, and that is that the Ninth Circuit decision does not affect the EV readiness provisions of the REACH codes that various Marin jurisdictions enacted. And I think that the major remodel part of the county code and some variations as adopted by local jurisdictions is probably also not affected by the city of Berkeley decision. So I think we can still be encouraging our local jurisdictions who may be a little gun shy on a new building, what to do with new buildings, that they absolutely can move forward and enforce those two provisions.
Okay. All right, so are there any other questions?
Bill Carney's got his hand up.
Oh, Bill.
Yeah, I just point out that the electrification plan that we heard about from Brian does include the REACH codes that have already been adopted. And I think there's a recognition in there that they need to be adjusted in light of the Ninth Circuit. So I think we do have that local pathway to apply some of the really great research that you guys have put together and, and get it in the county's hands and let them go forward. I also had another kind of specific question. So towns, when they're considering new construction or developments, new developments, for larger developments are required to do environmental impact reports. And part of those reports include mitigations for reducing things all environmental impacts, but greenhouse gas emissions is among those and is a whole category. So if there were a mitigation passed by, included in an EIR that said you can't use gas, would that be subject to the preemption of the Ninth Circuit, or is the EPR world sufficiently removed to escape that? Would that be a valid mitigation to put in an EIR? And I'm thinking of this specifically for Northgate, where it is currently an issue.
Hey, let me address that first, Bill. That's a legally fraught question. And it's difficult to answer that without lots of qualifications and specifics. But and I haven't seen other than some generalized memos on the subject, I haven't seen anything that directly addresses definitively that question. But I would start, frankly, with the presumption that a city cannot require through CEQA an applicant to do something that the city is not otherwise authorized to do for being preempted by EPCA. That said, anybody that's dealt with CEQA applicants and documents and so on, if an applicant were to be encouraged to adopt an electric only kind of a mode of development, is that a mandate? I don't know. It depends on the nature of the relationship and the requirement as between the developer and the agency of jurisdiction. So it gets into a gray area very quickly. But I think it's safe to start with the assumption, though, that if you look at it as a mandate, whether or not that mandate is by ordinance or by a CEQA mitigation requirement that the applicant would not otherwise do or agree to, that is subject to a Berkeley problem, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any further questions, and in which case we have only a few minutes left for reports from organizations. Maybe I'll take 2 reports of a couple of minutes apiece, tops, and then I'll say something about the upcoming climate action working group meetings. So since I don't see any hands up or reports from organizations. Why don't I start? There's Jody, and then I'll come in. Jody.
Yeah, hi,
I was
everybody.
looking for you, Jody.
Thank you, everybody, of course, for being here for these great presentations. Just very quick updates. I just wanted to mention, I'll put in the chat, but 350 Marin, we did basically launch our college internship recruitment. And so we've got our application in there, and then also our job description. So for that's two to three summer interns that we're looking for to help us all in climate issues across the county, and then also some specific things, other things. And also we have a new campaign that did actually launch where we're working with, this is under our 501c3 to work on educating candidates and electeds on climate issues under the 501c4 through 350 Bay Area. We did endorse a candidate this year for the first time in Larkspur, and we might be doing that as well with the supervisors if there's a runoff. I also just want to mention, with a different hat, the Marin Climate Action and Sustainability Collaborative is going to meet again on March 4th. Mary Sackett came this last time and talked with us a little bit about how the board's subcommittee works with staff of the county on climate issues and how we can provide more input and feedback. We're going to invite Eric Lucan for the next meeting, which would be in May. So I think I said March 14th, 2 to 3, that meeting is happening if anyone wants to come who hasn't so far. And I'll just mention quickly, Fairfax Climate Action Committee, we had our retreat. We have a very detailed and elaborate annual action plan in draft for 2024-25, which we're refining and hope will approve and then submit to our town council for funding of a couple of projects in March, April. But that's it quickly.
Jody. So I wanted to say a few things about what Marine Conservation League is doing. You know, the focus here in this meeting on building electrification was really on the county and local jurisdictions, or in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District level, but it wasn't on consumer choice aggregators or CCAs. And MCE is our CCA. Now, the CCAs have money for community energy programs as well as cleaner procurement of energy. And as an example, CCAs have put money into at least pilots to provide incentives for the transition to, I'm focusing now on building electrification, to provide incentives for the transition to electric appliances. They've put money into concierge services for getting appliances into buildings. They've given assistance to jurisdictions on permitting reform and reach codes, grants to local jurisdictions for building electrification projects, and even Leslie referred to emergency loaner programs. There are some pilots of those that are occurring. And now some of those consumer choice aggregators have hit their financial reserve targets and have more money to spend. And some are allocating dollars to community energy programs as well as clean energy procurement. So we've been really looking at the state of finances of CCAs and MCE, the state of excess surpluses at these CCAs, and how other CCAs have been spending their surpluses, especially on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. We sent a letter to MCE asking about the state of their surpluses. And we'll find out soon to what extent they're close to meeting their financial reserve requirements. And to the extent that there are excess reserves, we want to understand what's the process for allocating them, some estimates of the impact of different ways of different programs on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Our preference that any excess reserves be spent on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and that again is community energy programs and clean energy procurement. And that any customer rate cuts really should focus on lower income customers. And I mentioned this both to provide some outline of what we've been, some of the work that we're doing, but also just to provide context for hopefully we'll be having a series of sessions on what other CCAs are doing, both around community energy programs and about this cleaner energy procurement, LOE matching of renewable energy to load. So that's some background on what we're doing and really on what's going to be coming up over the next whole bunch of months. Belle, you have your hand up, and you are on mute.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Thanks. Wonderful. I wanted to say that the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership is having its next meeting on the 12th of March. It's a Tuesday. And Mark Brown, who's the from MWPA, is going to be talking about the unusual destructiveness of the wildfire in Maui, the Haina wildfire, and also the wildfires in the boreal forest in Canada. And the theme is wildfires and climate change. And it should be a fascinating discussion. And I've just been able to confirm that we're going to be able to follow through with another presentation on that subject in July. And that's with Dr. Daniel Swain from UCLA, meteorologist and climate scientist, who will be addressing ESP at that time. So thanks a lot.
So we're really, we're now out of time. So I want to remind folks that the next Climate Action Working Group meeting will be on Wednesday, March 20th. Again, it will be 10 to noon. As you've seen, we're going to start pretty close to 10 o'clock. So, so do try to attend early. And with that, that's Ken.
I would just encourage, we're doing this one hybrid, as you can see, and we had about 5 of us here at the MCL offices. It's kind of fun. 6, Bob corrects. So anybody who'd like to come in person, it would be wonderful.
Yeah, and we really hope to build up the in-person attendance here. Okay, with that, I think we're done, folks. Thank you.
Thanks.